Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Banfield, and we are chasing the truth today.
We have crucial updates today regarding the investigation into Lynette Hooker.
To be honest, I am feeling incredibly frustrated and heavy-hearted.
Furious with Brian Hooker, yet strangely hopeful all at once.
Let me explain why. I just learned that despite 3 days searching with sonar, drones, divers,
And Maggie.
the highly trained cadaver dog from Broward County, the Coast Guard and specialized investigative agents have been unable to find any remains
Of Lynette Hooker out in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas.
It is just completely heartbreaking because I honestly believed,
With the exact GPS coordinates showing where Brian was lurking on the night of April 4th.
and April 5th they would locate either her body or some other evidence, such as her dry bag and the missing oar she took with her. Things like that.
Perhaps they would have uncovered some trace of those missing items.
But I can confirm they have still not located her body. Now the Coast Guard cutter and the recovery teams are preparing to leave.
One official report notes they depart at 10:30 Friday morning, June 5th.
I am recording this late Thursday night on June 4th, and my heart is heavy. I truly felt they were close to finding her. But they haven't. That doesn't mean it is over. Not by a long shot.
It only means this specific search did not yield results. This is a devastating blow for her mother Darlene and Lynette's daughter,
Carly, crushing for her father, Dan, and devastating for all of her close friends and everyone who demands justice for what happened to her. But despite all this, I must remind you of something.
I have covered dozens of criminal cases that secured murder convictions without a body.
I know you have likely heard that old saying, no body, no case.
That is absolute nonsense. You can absolutely prosecute a murder case without a body, and I have watched it succeed before. Do not lose hope or think justice is completely out of reach.
Oh, trust me, there will.
I still firmly believe we will see an arrest and prosecution of Brian Hooker, unless he decides to plead.
He faces no official charges at this moment, and he remains innocent of any wrongdoing until proven guilty in court. But things are looking incredibly grim for Brian Hooker, and here is why.
Just because searchers missed Lynette's body does not mean they came up empty-handed.
If you are wondering why that is,
How, after all this time, when those Abaco waters are basically a shallow, open bathtub, where you can easily see straight to the bottom, making you think a body would instantly be spotted if anything had occurred in those shallows. It has been nearly 8 weeks since Lynette first vanished.
we are just 2 days shy of that 2-month mark, and by now, decomposition has certainly taken hold.
Especially on land, perhaps even slower than in warm Bahamian waters filled with active local wildlife. And so, the best these searchers could hope for was finding a skull, a jawbone, or even just a few scattered, disconnected bones. That was their absolute best-case scenario, right? But scattered bones get incredibly difficult to track down over time, especially once the local wildlife gets to them.
That rule applies on dry land, too.
So that is probably why we still haven't found Lynette. But it certainly isn't because Brian Hooker told the truth. And that's exactly where my hope kicks in. This isn't over yet, Brian Hooker. See, a major reason why the Coast Guard went out with those divers, high-tech sonar, drones, and Maggie was to retrace exactly what Brian Hooker claimed he did. They wanted to find the physical evidence that should be there, but isn't. Because proving that someone is lying often means showing that the critical evidence that should exist simply isn't there. And so,
I can't share the exact details of what Coast Guard investigators uncovered or came up short on.
but sources tell me that the specific items they expected to find but didn't,
In the areas they searched are just as damning as any physical proof.
there is one quote from my contact that perfectly sums up the entire situation. Cover your ears if you don't like swearing, because here it is.
He is screwed.
Right, so that's what gives me hope. I get it though. They haven't recovered Lynette's body,
But the actual evidence they did collect, combined with the glaring absences where things should have been,
Those are the exact reasons why Brian
Hooker is screwed.
Now, let me share another detail that makes me optimistic. And it involves what we saw unfold earlier today. We saw that small boat, Brian and Lynette's 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy. It is actually a solid, rigid craft, right? From a distance, it looks like an inflatable boat, but it isn't. That vessel has been locked away by the Royal Bahamian Police for 7.5 weeks. Investigators from the Coast Guard have been desperate to inspect this piece of evidence for a very long time. We know that Maggie, the specialized cadaver dog, finally managed to get inside that small boat to perform a thorough scent sweep. Unfortunately, she did not alert. Now, this detail is crucial, and I am sure you are wondering, where exactly was that boat being kept? If it just sat out in the pouring rain for 7 weeks, that would absolutely ruin the scent trail, and you are right. But I confirmed through my sources that the boat was actually stored inside a secure warehouse garage, completely protected from the elements. So, thank goodness for that, because it preserved any potential forensic evidence left on board. Still, it is incredibly frustrating that Maggie did not pick up a scent there. Now, if Brian Hooker, not claiming he is guilty since he hasn't been charged, actually murdered his wife on their yacht, Soulmate, as I suspect, which makes far more sense when you look at his web of lies. But again, he hasn't been charged with any crime. Now, if he loaded Lynette's body into that dinghy, taking her somewhere to dispose of the remains, the timeline of how long she was inside is critical. I have spoken with specialist canine handlers in the past. Handlers who train these specialized forensic dogs. They say these animals can detect decay on a surface just 3 hours after death. That 3-hour window after death is when the scent profile starts to change. But what if Lynette was not in that dinghy for over 3 hours? That could explain why the search dog Maggie failed to alert. Still, it was a massive relief to watch footage of the Coast Guard securing that dinghy and hauling it back to the main cutter. Then, we watched that dinghy arrive on the bow of an OTH boat, filmed right after our footage captured it coming toward the Abaco Inn. From there, they dropped off a few Coast Guard personnel onto the dock, before turning around and heading straight back out toward the cutter. They headed right through Tillucut, heading to the eastern side of Elbow Cay, where the ship was waiting. This is a major breakthrough. Excellent news for the investigation. Securing that boat is massive. I cannot reveal everything they discovered on board, but I will tell you this much. This entire trip was worth it. As I mentioned, their searches successfully established what key items are missing from where they should be. That is crucial. And they finally secured the dinghy, something investigators have been targeting for a very long time. Its contents remain a mystery. We do not know what forensic evidence it will yield. But while I saw the NT300 engine still mounted on the back, the Torqeedo outboard motor was nowhere to be found. Where did that Torqeedo motor go? After all, that was the primary motor on this dinghy just a couple of years back. For most live-a-boat sailors, the people who actually live on their vessels, they tell you that you never throw away a backup motor. You keep it. A backup is your ultimate lifeline. That dinghy is your only connection to land. And we know that Torqeedo motor is not sitting on board the Soulmate. So, where is it? Could it have been used to weigh something down in the ocean? We do not know yet. But there is still reason for hope. As the Bahamian police handed over critical evidence directly to Coast Guard investigators. That is absolute music to my ears. And it could be the turning point in this case. Investigators still have a massive amount of work ahead to build this file. But the fact that local police handed over crucial evidence, and I am not talking about the dinghy. That boat is vital, and we saw it ourselves, but there is other evidence hidden from view. But my sources assure me that the Bahamian police force transferred this vital new evidence to Coast Guard. Investigators, who took it straight out to the cutter,
Secure those evidence bags in the impound lot, lock them down, and prepare for a case.
Now, I already shared one of the key details we uncovered.
Exclusively right here, long before the mainstream media began reporting it as an absolute fact.
This has officially become a homicide investigation.
The suspected murder of Lynette Hooker.
That is a huge deal. It means this is the kind of case where investigators are crossing every T and dotting every I, because the physical evidence is absolutely critical.
Like I said, no body, no problem.
There is plenty of other evidence out there, and from what my insiders are telling me,
Multiple highly placed sources, I should add. This search trip was absolutely not a waste of time. In fact, one insider described it as well worth the journey.
and another called it incredibly valuable.
So, there it is. I share your deep frustration and disappointment.
I truly wanted this for Darlene, Dan, who is Lynette's father.
Her mother, Darlene, and her daughter, Carly. I wanted them to get Lynette back.
Honestly, I just wanted Lynette to come home.
And I know you did too.
She was an innocent woman, and her co-workers at AT&T called her a bright light.
A wonderful person whom everyone loved having around. Easily their favorite colleague on the job. But then, one of her closest co-workers told me something. And it truly broke me. He said she seemed so lonely, even while married to this Brian.
That is heartbreaking, because she was so close to her work family at AT&T. They adored her.
Not everyone is loved by their colleagues, but these people genuinely loved her. They absolutely loathed him. He was an absolute jerk.
From their descriptions, the man was a highly manipulative, scheming individual. He was constantly plotting, pulling strings, and trying to stick it to the company. He acted like a shop steward. As a union representative, he constantly abused his authority simply to disrupt the entire business. Even when his fellow employees had zero complaints and wanted no part of it. And of course, we all know how toxic he really is.
He was actually fired from AT&T for spoofing his GPS coordinates on his company vehicle. So,
He is obsessed with disappearing, making sure nobody ever knows his location or his actions. That is the exact type of suspect we are dealing with.
but what I love are the details he overlooked, because that is precisely how investigators catch criminals.
And there are plenty of those. Honestly, I felt incredibly encouraged over the last 3 days talking to my Bahamas contacts about what they found. Even considering the things they did not find.
The evidence they did uncover versus the glaring absences of what should have been there. It is a classic case of proving a negative, and I absolutely love it.
I am going to go out on a limb here and suggest we cannot assume this is the final deployment by the Coast Guard.
We simply do not know. They could return at any point for follow-up inquiries. They might easily go back.
They don't need to bring that massive cutter. They can just fly in. That is what they did last time, right?
It can definitely be done. So if they actually return, if new intelligence comes in, if,
Say, Bahamian police or a local tipster uncover something, there is a highly unusual protocol to follow. American investigators cannot just immediately take custody of Lynette's remains
And fly back to the United States to repatriate her.
The legal process is incredibly rigid, messy, and deeply frustrating.
I do not know if you have dealt with an overseas death, but my family has.
And it was an absolute nightmare just trying to.
Well, get her mother's body back to Canada from Britain, even with their close ties.
It was an exhausting, painfully slow process. When it is a criminal investigation, returning human remains is infinitely more complex. And that was just a natural death in the family. So you can imagine how difficult this case could get. I know for a fact that even if detectives located Lynette's remains, they would not be broadcasting it. And definitely not to me. They might update close family like Darlene, Carly, or Dan, but never the media. They certainly would not let us find out, unless we happen to stumble upon it ourselves.
That is because of the incredibly delicate protocols and politics at play.
That is just how it works. So if they do eventually discover her remains out there,
Expect these complicated international protocols to flare up in the future.
And honestly, I hope it does. That is the best kind of trouble to have.
you want that headache because it means you finally found Lynette.
There are a few other updates from today. Keep in mind, I am recording this on Thursday, June 4th.
A team made a massive push to dive in.
Two specific areas that immediately caught my attention.
They deployed divers and side-scan sonar right where the vessel's soulmate was anchored.
Remember, we have a key witness who swore she heard a massive splash around 9:30 p.m.
Not a small splash,
but a heavy, unmistakable impact right beside soulmate. The people with her also spotted emergency flares. Several witnesses in that group saw them pierce the darkness. Now, accounts vary. Some say they shot straight up, others say they skimmed the water.
That could be due to their vantage point or tricks of memory, but still.
Multiple independent witnesses saw flares coming directly from soulmate.
not far north of Lubbers Cay, where Brian claims he dropped anchor and fired flares,
while passing boats ignored him, but directly on board soulmate.
So search divers thoroughly combed the seabed where that boat was moored.
They identified the exact anchorage because Hopetown Fire and Rescue met the boat the very next morning.
So they had a reliable starting point. The exact coordinates? Not entirely certain, though we do have AIS data putting the boat right there.
Between the eyewitness statements and the raw tracking records, they have a solid fix on the anchorage.
That is crucial. They are diving there to find out what caused that massive splash. What exactly was thrown overboard? What else went over during a violent struggle? Honestly, we just do not know.
And fortunately, an eyewitness actually came forward to corroborate that exact detail.
So that is not the only spot they searched. Witnesses also spotted them searching north of Brian Hooker's vessel. If you have been following our investigation, you know this is where things get interesting.
This stunning waterfront estate sits right on the western shore of Elbow Cay.
A massive white house built directly on the edge of Aunt Pat's Bay.
Investigators combed that entire area, the exact location where he claims it happened. Where evidence should have been dropped, where the physical struggle should have left traces.
Retracing his movements, detectives focused their search right there.
This became the primary focus of today's search.
Right near those dense mangroves. Remember when I pointed that out?
Way back in week 2 of this investigation.
The Coast Guard admitted they were highly interested in searching those specific mangroves. That thick brush sits directly behind the spot where Brian claims this incident occurred.
Let us be honest. A thick mangrove forest is an ideal location to conceal a body. It offers perfect plausible deniability. She just drifted in there and slowly decomposed over time.
Not my fault. Case closed, right?
But not if your own GPS data places you right inside those mangroves.
Late at night, when you claim to be drifting helplessly because your wife allegedly jumped with the ignition keys, and you somehow lost an oar.
Suddenly, a highly trained Marine supposedly cannot paddle a small dinghy with a single oar.
I could have paddled it. Even at 5'6", I could navigate with one oar. Or, want to know what I would have done?
If his story were true, I would have stepped out of the dinghy. The water depth in that area was likely only 3 feet deep.
Exactly. That is the kind of deception we are dealing with here.
But instead, he claims he was helpless, drifting all the way across to Marsh Harbor.
Finally, a full mile out, he drops the anchor and begins firing emergency flares into the night sky.
The entire story is complete fiction. Furthermore, it does not even get dark until 8 o'clock at night.
Yet he claims he could not see her, blaming rough waves and pitch-black darkness. It is simply not true.
In reality, you left the Abaco Inn at 7:30 p.m. under clear skies. I stood in that exact spot and timed it myself. There was still plenty of light at 7:55. Within just 5 minutes, by 8 p.m., the sun finally dips below the horizon, causing darkness to fall very rapidly.
But at 7:55, visibility is still decent, and at 7:45, it is completely bright outside.
Ultimately, his entire timeline is a complete fabrication. As a reminder, I am recording from our northern studio.
Our remote northern setup here in Canada.
You will likely hear the local frogs singing in the background. Around 8:30 p.m., their mating chorus gets incredibly loud.
It is peak mating season right now.
They get so loud we occasionally have to shut the windows.
We are only about 100 feet from the marsh, and they are out there in full force.
And the rain is starting to fall.
So you will likely hear the storm picking up very soon. Apologies for that, but hey, that is nature.
We already know his story was pure garbage. There is no way he made that tragic trip, supposedly drifting all the way to Marsh Harbor.
None of it happened. Now, investigators are out there proving it.
They are making absolutely sure they have proof. A jury needs to see everything I have witnessed firsthand, because you cannot exactly take 12 jurors out on a boat ride to show them this. Highly implausible story. Retracing his steps on camera makes perfect sense. They must also prove his alleged timeline is completely impossible. Where is the dry bag and the oar? Where is all this lost gear? Out in the Bahamas and the Abacos, debris like that always washes ashore.
If you watch Nathan's videos, you see plenty of boaters.
Motorboats and hats. Plus, lost mugs, glasses, and random deck gear, all of that eventually floats right up onto the beaches. Sometimes you can spot it sitting on the shallow bottom, clear as a swimming pool. Exactly. Debunking his ridiculous claims is just as crucial as finding Lynette and locating that missing evidence. Think those clean, natural products you buy actually come from wholesome family businesses? Not even close. Huge corporations and private equity firms quietly buy them out, hijacking the brands and packing them with cheap synthetic fillers. Fortunately, one brand does things differently. The Van Man Company. They launched the grass-fed tallow trend years ago with wholesome moisturizers, and they have been winning over customers with incredibly clean, near-edible skincare. Grass-fed tallow works because the fatty acids mirror our skin's natural oils, allowing our bodies to easily absorb it. It easily replaces daily lotion, night cream, wrinkle cream, and even first aid or diaper balm. This formula is strong enough to restore dry skin, yet clean enough to eat. Just real ingredients, ready to ditch those corporate chemicals? Head over to vanman.shop/Banfield and use my code BANFIELD for 15% off your first purchase. That is vanman.shop/Banfield. Apply the code BANFIELD to save 15% today, or simply click the direct link down in the video description. Van Man. Real ingredients, zero exceptions. Perhaps you are wondering if maybe they recovered some other evidence deep underwater. Not Lynette herself, but maybe other vital clues and wreckage. Unfortunately, my sources confirmed that the dive search came up empty. Still, but the case files the Bahamian police shared with United States Coast Guard investigators are incredibly promising. It contains vital leads. Yes, it is discouraging that this recovery effort did not deliver the answers we wanted. But this case is far from closed. Remember, homicide has no statute of limitations. Justice never expires. Authorities can continue their hunt, and everyday citizens walking the coastline might still stumble upon something. A paddleboarder cruising the shore could easily spot clues.
That is highly possible, right? The Abacos are packed with tourists and explorers, all searching these stunning, secluded beaches and hidden coves.
Because of this unfolding story, locals are actively searching the area. Our contacts are scanning the waters constantly. Marina and Nathan are both out there right now, refusing to stop. They are heading out again tomorrow, even after the Coast Guard cutter wraps up its search. They believe there are still blind spots where the missing sailboat might have drifted.
The soulmate could have slipped through, completely invisible on standard GPS tracking. Either way, hope is far from lost. That matters. Seeing Maggie return to shore today, I realized just how hard that cadaver dog has been working.
If you missed our previous updates, Maggie and her handler, Chris,
Are assisting the Coast Guard on loan from the Broward County Sheriff's Department. They make an incredibly dedicated team.
Lindsay and I actually got to spend time with Chris and Maggie in the Bahamas about 7 weeks back.
She did not alert on dry land either.
It is highly frustrating. She did not alert on the water, showed no reaction on the dinghy, and came up empty during all her land searches. But keep this in mind.
Even though Maggie did not find anything today,
Hope remains. I have investigated cold cases where trained dogs successfully located human remains from decades earlier.
That scent profile does not just vanish. She can return, or other handlers can search later. This is not over.
I still hold on to hope as new leads continue to trickle in.
And speaking of those new leads, if you saw anything on April 4th, the night before Easter Sunday, please send us your tips.
you can email us at dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com, and I completely understand if you prefer to stay quiet.
Alternatively, you can use the Coast Guard Investigative Service app to submit an anonymous tip.
Search for CGIS tips.
Get the app and submit what you know. It makes a massive difference.
Many of you already have, and we appreciate it.
I only wish you would share those leads with me too. Authorities cannot pass information back, though I pass everything to them.
Legally, they have to keep their evidence under wraps. I get it. This is a building prosecution. They are clearly building a case against him.
Brian Hooker remains uncharged for now.
But the clock is ticking. Now, a few other developments.
I have managed to gather more details about yesterday's meeting at the Abaco Inn.
It was a major gathering of lead investigators at the inn.
We wondered what was brewing, and I can now reveal some behind-the-scenes context. It appears this session was actually called by the Bahamian government, bringing in senior-level, high-ranking officers to bat.
Briefing with the Royal Bahamian Police Force and their local defense force. They abruptly convened the group.
Right in the middle of the afternoon, alongside Coast Guard Command. And almost immediately after,
My sources say Bahamian police ordered that the Coast Guard could no longer use local guides or private vessels to navigate the local waters, meaning no hired captains or boats.
they were strictly restricted to using official Bahamian government vessels instead. It is incredibly frustrating. In an emergency, you accept every single piece of help offered.
Especially when the Coast Guard has to reach 100 coordinates immediately. I watched how the Bahamian authorities treated the Coast Guard during the first deployment. They literally left them waiting on the docks for hours. So, it is deeply concerning to hear this new decree banning any help from local boats and captains.
We know for a fact those civilian vessels were already actively helping the search.
Yet the Bahamian officials, specifically the local police force, issued that sudden ban.
Immediately following that closed-door meeting, those private vessels were dismissed.
It is baffling, though no official complaints have surfaced.
And I doubt they ever will.
No one is talking about how the Coast Guard was handled this time, or if they reached their targets. Fortunately, they deployed their own over-the-horizon boat.
To be clear, that is a rigid inflatable boat.
Over the horizon means high speed. It is not some slow, lumbering cutter. They brought their own gear.
You have probably seen it in the photos, the bright orange vessel.
The Bahamian authorities also deployed their own massive, high-powered, rigid inflatable boat. It is an impressive piece of machinery. They had several on site. That critical meeting occurred yesterday, and the Bahamian officials are clearly tightening control.
I can confirm that yesterday's search efforts faced major delays due to severe lightning.
The weather was terrible. As I showed you yesterday, heavy rain blanketed the area. This created dangerous, low-visibility conditions for the dive team.
Normally, the clear Bahamian waters offer excellent underwater visibility.
But heavy rain and dark overcast skies make tracking anything down there highly difficult.
And when lightning strikes, everything stops. Vessels stay docked, and divers cannot enter the water. Because of this risk, yesterday's operation was put on hold for several hours.
Then, earlier today, an unexpected and dramatic event unfolded right in the middle of the afternoon.
Entirely separate from the investigation into Lynette Hooker, the local volunteer fire crew had to mobilize.
Urgently, they raced toward the Hopetown Marina after reports came in of a massive catamaran fire.
Thick smoke was pouring from a luxury multi-hull vessel.
They had to contain it immediately. Fortunately, they shared footage with us, showing the intense conditions they face. It is a stark reminder of what they manage, while simultaneously assisting with the ongoing search for Lynette Hooker.
Meanwhile, alongside the Coast Guard, the Defense Force, and local police, these dedicated volunteers stepped up once more.
I must ask,
Please consider donating to the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue Organization. They are easy to find online, and their efforts today show exactly why they deserve our support. True heroes. Fully volunteer, they have provided invaluable support to the Coast Guard during this difficult case. That is my brief appeal for today. Your support would go a long way, so that is how the situation stands at the moment. Uncovering these details has been incredibly challenging, but I am grateful to finally bring you some clarity regarding what is actually happening in this complex search and recovery operation. I must leave you with one final sobering thought, however. Unfortunately. To be clear, the search team did not locate Lynette's remains.
but I want to choose my words carefully here because the details matter.
When I tell you investigators felt this entire trip was absolutely worth it, I can also tell you that whatever evidence they managed to recover beyond that dinghy, which was their main target for so long, securing that small boat, and they succeeded.
But beyond that vessel, they recovered other pieces of evidence that are
highly damaging for suspect Brian Hooker. The clock is ticking. Thank you all for listening and watching, and please remember to subscribe. It truly helps support our work when you do. It is quick, completely free, and actually pretty fun. I don't know, I just felt like saying that.
But I will keep tracking this case and bring you every update as it develops.
In fact, I have a special investigative episode coming out for you soon. I am bringing on a body language expert who basically dissects everything Brian Hooker said and did, explaining exactly what his movements and words revealed. Trust me, you will not want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, this truth is not just serious, it is drop-dead serious.